Hi, today we're going to talk about filming wildlife with video. Now, I've been photographing wildlife as a stills photographer for the best part of 50 years, started when I was a teenager, but shooting video is still relatively new to me and I'm going through a steep learning curve. But I thought I'd just pass on the little bits that I've learned so far and perhaps point out a few of the things that still totally confuse me. And I'm going to start off with some really bad news. If you're going to start shooting video, you've got to go back to using a tripod again. It's ironic, after all these years of religiously using a tripod with my Canon system, very rarely took a picture without. Not that you could hand hold an 800mm with a 1DX camera body on the end of it, it was too heavy. But when I swapped to Olympus, we got 7.5 stops of image stabilizer, and for the first time I could hand hold, and it's not just sharpness that using a tripod helps with, it helps with composition too, because when you're on a tripod you take more care over your composition than you did when you were hand holding. But with 7.5 stops of image stabilizer, the image is steady enough that you can compose the picture thoughtfully as well. So I've just got to a point where I wasn't using a tripod all of the time. Now that I've started to shoot video as much as I am, had to go back to a tripod. And worse than that, if you're going to use a tripod, it has to be a heavy tripod. If you're going to get those really smooth pans, they only really come about by having a heavy tripod. This is a Sachtler German fluid head. It's a wonderful thing. I have no idea how much the head cost. I was given it. It had been in a friend's garage gathering dust for some years and he said I could have it. Very generous of him. But it's a bowl type tripod head. And I didn't have a bowl type tripod. Instead of a flat head on, it's got this bowl that the head goes in, and then you can level the head up to get straight horizons when you need to. Now that isn't a problem I hit too often with horizons, but I do hit it with birds on water and need to level things up, and it's quicker than adjusting each individual leg to get the balance right. But it is a proper fluid head and it's very, very smooth, and I don't get much vibration when I touch the handle with my hand and start to move it. With other tripods, if it's lighter, you'll get vibration straight away. With this you don't. You still have to be careful, but it's a lovely smooth effect. And I've always used video heads for my stills photography. I've tried various gimbals over the years, but I always go back to video fluid type heads, and this is the best one I've ever owned. But it is very heavy, and the tripod itself is what they call a 2-barred tripod. Now whenever you watch a wildlife film on the television and they show the filmmaking going on, they always have these 2-barred type tripods. And if you see a news reporter out in the streets filming for television, they always have these double-barred tripods. I've always wondered why. Why do video users make use of these and not stills photographers very much? Well, I bought this one off eBay for £50. It's not branded. I have no idea what make it is, and it had a couple of bolts missing from the legs, which I was able to easily replace, and it's remarkably stable. I don't know what it is about having this double barred system, but it is very, very rigid, even when it's fully extended. Unfortunately, it is very heavy, so I tend to use this tripod and head when I'm within perhaps half a mile of the car. If I've got to walk a lot further than that, I still take a lighter tripod with me. And I think next time I fly abroad, if this coronavirus ever goes away, I won't be able to travel with this. I won't be able to fly with it. So I've still got my Manfrotto fluid head. This is on a carbon fiber tripod. This is the 501 head, and it is a video head, and it's been wonderful for my stills photography over the years. But it is nowhere near as good as that head. I'm very conscious of it. As soon as I touch the handle and start to pan, I'm likely to get vibration, simply because it's not as heavy. So what I tend to do is I line up on my subject, I get it in focus, compose the picture, start the camera running, and then I let go. So I'm hands-free. Then you get no vibration at all. Trouble is, if the subject moves, you've got to pan with it, then you've got difficulties. You've got to touch this very, very gently and try and keep up with your subject. So that by far is my preference to use, but at times I have no choice but to use this. It is an old head now. It's had that 800mm Canon on it for many years, which was overweight for the specification of the head, so perhaps it's a little bit worn. Perhaps I need to be changing it, either buying a second-hand 501 that hasn't been used much, or perhaps the 502. We'll see. Not got to that point yet. The next thing to talk about is shutter speeds. This was something I was ignoring in my early days of shooting video, and I used to complain about my videos looked cartoonish or jittery. And then as I read more and more about it, I realized that I was ignoring one of the basic rules of video, is that your shutter speed should be twice that of your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 25 frames per second, you should have roughly a 50th of a second shutter speed, or as close to it as you can get. And I do a lot of high speed videos, so I'm shooting with the Olympus at 120 frames per second. I should be aiming at 1/240th of a second, or 1/250th, whatever's available. Just got to be close to it. The idea is, if you're using a faster shutter speed, which is what I was tending to do, each individual frame is too sharp, and therefore as it's blending one picture into another, they don't blend very smoothly. It's better if your frames are not razor sharp. They blend from one frame to the next much better. And I did feel, when I started to take that rule seriously, that the standard of my video did go up a little bit, but I'm not 100% convinced. I experiment with it from time to time, and I really struggle to see the difference. From shutter speeds, that leads very nicely into talking about frame rates, which is a very confusing subject. There are lots of tutorials on it on YouTube, and I'm going to claim that I've watched all of them, and it still leaves me asking questions. So I think it's safe to say that in the UK we should be using 25 frames per second. In America they're using 30 frames per second, and then you read that if you want a cinematic look you should be shooting at 24 frames per second, and straight away I say to myself, what does cinematic look like? And how can just changing the frame rate by 1 have such an effect? But I don't know what cinematic looks like, so it's very hard to tell. You know, I used to have this problem when I started off as a stills photographer. I used to read that your pictures had to be pin sharp. But if you didn't know what pin sharp looked like, how did you know if your pictures were pin sharp? I solved that one. I joined the Nature Photographers Portfolio, which was a group of people who circulated their slides, wildlife photographers circulating their slides around the country. So I got to see the original slides of some of our well-known bird photographers, and I could look at them on my light box with my loupe or magnifier, and I could see what pin sharp was. Otherwise I didn't know, and today I don't know what cinematic looks like either. And also I'm puzzled about, we're shooting at 25 frames per second for UK customers and 30 frames for America, but surely it's a global market today. When you take video, people are seeing it from all around the world. It's not just British people that's looking at my YouTube channels. And if we're talking about broadcasting on television, well, when BBC sell the rights to Planet Earth, surely they're selling them worldwide. So what frame rates are they shooting at? They need to sell it in America just as they need to sell it in every country around the world to recover that vast amount of money that they spend on it. So I really haven't quite grasped this frame rate yet. Now, what I've always said about digital photography is you don't need to listen to anybody anymore. You can test things for yourself. In the days of film, if you did a test, you took your pictures, you posted them off to the processors. It took 2 weeks before they came back, by which time you'd forgotten what you were testing. You often couldn't tie your notes in to those individual frames of pictures to work out what your test was. But with digital, it's instant. I can take it, load it on the computer and look at it straight away, so it's easier to test. And I've always done that as a stills photographer, but I'm struggling with that with video. I've been shooting at different shutter speeds, different frame rates, playing it back, and you know, it's ever so hard to see a difference. This morning I was shooting at 60 frames per second, then 50, then 30, rushed home. This was just of Canada geese and mallards on a local lake. Rushed home and I stared at them on the computer screen. I can't see it. So I'm not sure it's something you have to be too fussy about. I'm shooting at 25 frames per second, like now when I'm filming myself, but most of my wildlife footage I'm doing much faster. I'm shooting at 60 frames per second on the Panasonic G9 in 4K, whereas on the Olympus at 4K it will only give me 30 frames per second, so that's what I'm shooting at. that would allow me to slow things down a little bit if I want to, without losing quality in theory. I never used to watch much wildlife footage on the television because I'm doing it all day long. When I settle down in front of the telly, I wanted to watch a film or the news or the football, not more wildlife. But now that I'm filming wildlife, I'm watching wildlife programs a lot because it's part of the learning curve. And I'm very conscious of the fact there's very little straightforward footage on the television of wildlife today with a camera on a tripod. It hardly ever happens. It's all slow motion, time lapse, which is speeded up motion, gimbals, people walking around with gimbals, all drone photography. Very little straightforward footage. And I've really got into slow motion. I think wildlife in slow motion looks wonderful. So with my Olympus camera, I get 120 frames per second, which is roughly 6 times slow. And with the Panasonic G9 that I've recently bought, and I'm still experimenting with, I get 180 frames per second. I say I just love looking at wildlife in slow motion. When you are shooting in slow motion, you lose autofocus on both the Panasonic and the Olympus cameras. So you have to manually focus. That's not an easy thing to do, especially after all these years of autofocus. Everything I've read about shooting video says that you should be manually focusing. But it's a struggle. I have peaking set on. Peaking is when the part of the picture that's sharp pixelates and goes either, well, whatever colour you choose, either red or white usually. That helps to tell which part of the picture is sharp, but it's still difficult. I've also bought an external monitor, a 5-inch monitor, and that works quite well when I'm in a hide. It gives you a bigger screen to try and manually focus on, but it isn't easy. If I'm not shooting slow motion, if I'm shooting normal speeds, and I've started using the Panasonic G9 a lot now for my video, that will shoot at 60 frames per second 4K and autofocus, and it's got this animal tracking on it, and it works, or at least it works for subjects that aren't flying. If you've got a slow flying bird, it might work, like a fulmar or a gannet or a goose or a swan, but for faster moving birds, no, it won't lock onto it. But for many subjects, let's just take a moorhen just running along the bank, it tracks it very well and focuses on it. So that's making life much easier. Sound. Something else I've read about wildlife photography is most of it is done in silent mode and the soundtrack is dubbed on afterwards. It's very rare the conditions are right for recording sound and filming at the same time. The first spring that I took this seriously, I spent a lot of time taking video of singing birds, and I bought a rifle mic. One of these things, a Rode. And the idea of that is it's concentrating the recording in front of you, and it tends to ignore the sounds behind and to the side of you, and it helped. It sort of magnified the bird singing in front. But unfortunately in the UK, it's very rare there isn't traffic noise in the distance, and we've become immune to it. We don't notice it, but the microphone notices, and you inevitably pick up the traffic over there and the sound of the wind as well, just going through the leaves and the tree. There's always a lot of noise. So a lot of the time I am dubbing the sound of a singing bird onto the picture afterwards. First one I did took me 3 evenings. I just didn't know how to do it. After that I've learned, and I can now do, let's say, a 30-second burst of song and dub it on and match the bill movements in 5 minutes. It's become quicker and easier to do. Depends on the species. Grasshopper warbler is dead easy. It opens its mouth, you start the song playing. When it closes its mouth, you stop the song. But other birds like reed buntings, which are very intermittent singers, that's a bit more time consuming. Now, if you're going to use a microphone out of doors, you've got to buy one of these. A dead cat. You might think it's a windless day, very, very calm, but at some point the wind will go across that microphone and you'll get this horrible rushing sort of sound. So microphones might work perfectly well indoors, but as soon as you go outdoors, put a dead cat on it. The official Rode one I think was about £30. This came off eBay from China. It was £3.50, and it seems fine to me. But it's the same with the little lapel mics. I've got a lapel mic on here. It's got a dead cat on it permanently, although it's not actually outside of my shirt at the moment. Whenever I do, I know I need a dead cat on it. When it comes to the actual filming, I know that I'm going to need distance shots, setting the scene, medium shots, close-up shots. In order to be able to edit it together, you've got to have pictures taken at different focal lengths. So I'm using the 100 to 400 Panasonic zoom quite a lot, the Leica zoom actually, which doesn't zoom very smoothly, so you can't sort of zoom in while you're filming, but at least you can keep changing the focal length of the lens and getting different settings from it. From an editing point of view, I'm using PowerDirector 18. I'm fairly computer literate. I can pick up computer software, so I was able to teach myself Adobe Premiere. Then I had to go with the DaVinci Elements, I think it's called, and I can learn them. What I can't do is remember them because they're not particularly user-friendly or intuitive. If you use them all the time, okay, you'd get into it. But I tried various bits of software. You can make use of the trial period. You can download a bit of software and use it, usually for 30 days. And I did this with many types of video editing software, and PowerDirector 18 is the one I found to be the best. I find it very simple, very intuitive, and I haven't found anything yet it can't do. It seems to do absolutely everything. And some of the tutorials on it on YouTube on how to do things are absolutely excellent. And that's it. A few of the things that I've learned about video so far. You know, a few years ago I predicted that stills photography was going to disappear. This must have been about the time when 4K video was being introduced onto consumer cameras for the first time. And I thought, why is anybody going to want to take stills pictures anymore? They can run video through, and each frame is such a large file, they'll be able to take the stills pictures off that. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, I seem to know very few of my friends, who are mostly wildlife photographers, who are shooting video. It's like they haven't found the video button yet. But I'm fascinated by it. It's given my photography a new lease of life and new skills to learn, and I'm really enjoying doing it.